begin with, we're gonna first check out this FortiGate physically. So as we'll see, this is a 50G. It's quite a small appliance, and if we flip it over, we see our ports. And let me move it around here. So obviously we have our power cable, USB if we're doing anything firmware through a USB, a console port. So this is if you want to, if you don't have necessarily network access, you can console into the FortiGate using a serial cable. And then you have your WAN port, an A. And this little thing usually means that by default it's used for FortiLink, which we're not going to go into right now. But it's essentially a way to manage easily, you know, Forti switches, FortiAPs and whatnot through this port. It doesn't have to be a FortiLink, but by default it is. Then you have 1, 2, and 3. These are your standard ports here. So what I'll be doing is I am going to go ahead and just plug it into number 1. And you'll see here, number 1 is blinking, means the link light is good. So by default, these come with a subnet that you will see in the documentation. It's like 192.168.1, and then the FortiGate is going to be .99, and then you're going to be putting your IP on that same subnet, but as say like a .100 or .40, what have you. But if you're grabbing this and it's an existing one, you may need to do a factory reset. So there is also this BLE and then /reset. So the BLE is just like Bluetooth, but we're not using that. That's what this little thing's for. I've never used that. You know, there's reasons for it, but in any case, we're gonna connect our laptop or our workstation to port 1. This should also, most FortiGates will give DHCP, so it may even assign you an IP address and then you can just get straight onto it. Or you can go and set your IP address statically on your network interface, which I will also show. So let's get into the computer and the setup. All right, now that we have either factory reset it or just plugged it in for the first time and we are connected, we'll go ahead and we'll check out our network adapter. We can do this 2 different ways, but we'll go to the network and sharing center since that's the easiest. My primary is in use, but the one that's connected to the FortiGate is this Ethernet 2. No internet access as, well, we don't have internet yet for it. We haven't configured that. And we will see that we can go to properties here and Internet Protocol version 4. And it says obtain an IP address automatically, obtain DNS server. So most of the FortiGates out of the box are going to be giving DHCP is going to be giving you an IP address automatically when you connect to its port. And matter of fact, we'll check that out right now. If I do an IP config, and matter of fact, we'll just do a /all as well. And this is our Ethernet 2 that we saw. So we can see that it has a .110 and its default gateway is .1.99. And, or sorry, this is the default gateway. The DHCP server is the exact same IP address that we see. So the FortiGate is giving us this address so that we can connect to it. Again, if for whatever reason, if it's not giving you an IP address, then just use the following IP address and just put it on the same subnet. So .1, just make sure you're not doing an overlapping address. So it's by default going to be a /24 or a basically this 255.255.255.0. And we don't need a default gateway. Default gateway is only if we want to get out to the internet. We don't need to configure that yet, so we can just click OK. And we'll click close and close again. And we'll close this guy as well. Let us go on to the machine. So now that we are on the same network, we will do .1.99. As a matter of fact, one thing you'll notice if you looked at the IP config is that my main network is also on the same network. So I'm very quickly, just because overlapping networks does not play nice, especially if it's on the same machine, because then the machine gets confused. So I'm going to go ahead and just disable this guy. So this is my main network. Now let's go back into Firefox. Try that one more time. And we'll add a /s. Make sure you do use HTTPS, as that's what the FortiGate wants usually. You'll get an error because your computer doesn't know any name that's trusted by a certificate authority for this IP address. So just click advanced, proceed to this network, and now we are on a login page. So we'll go ahead and we'll just type in admin with no password. It's going to ask us to put in a password. I'll just put in a very simple password. Make sure you put a good password because this is a firewall after all. We'll click OK. And then we will relog in with that new password that we set. So for this 40 converter that we're seeing here, this is used if you are migrating a old FortiGate into a new FortiGate. So you can basically get the configuration and, get it placed inside. Under the automatic patch upgrades, this is where you can essentially set up a schedule and have automatic updates for your FortiGate. Usually I specify that it be disabled just in case, any issues happen. So I'm going to go ahead and select that, and we will go ahead and save and continue. And we'll acknowledge. Lastly, we'll be discussing the dashboard setup, which is basically what they call FortiView monitors and good stuff. So these are essentially widgets that you'll be using to monitor the performance of your FortiGate, other statistics and whatnot. So optimals for, clean view. Comprehensive will give you a lot more information. It's going to show you a little video. If I had internet access, it would be showing me a video, but I don't. So I'm going to say do not show me again. And now we are in the FortiGate. So with us being in the FortiGate, let's just run through this. So these are like the widgets I'm talking about, right? Like you can move them around, you can move it that way, this way, and you can even add a few more. There's a lot of widgets you can add, so feel free to mess around with that. But usually the default's fine. So on here, you'll see the system information, the firmware. So do make sure that you are at least on the newest firmware of the branch. And when I say branch, what I'm really referring to are the minor releases. So that 7.0.2.4 that you see there. Those really should be called major releases for FortiGate because they bring new functionality and features. Do note that there are feature releases, which are releases that bring new features and are more likely to bring bugs. And then you have mature versions, which is what I would recommend you selecting. In addition to that, FortiGate has recommended release firmwares on their site. So I'll put a link to that down below, and then you can follow the recommended release for your model. But we're going to go straight to network and interfaces. So that port I had connected to port 1, as you can see in this little tiny graphic here. We have port 1 and it's connected to a VLAN switch. This switch is basically just a logical being of this IP address that can be used between these, three interfaces. Basically like a virtual IP, right? It does give it a address object, which we'll be talking about shortly, but this is an easy way so that you don't have to remember what you need to use. You just have a good naming schema for it. And now you have HTTPS, so we have administrative access. So this is, think of it as the access to the FortiGate. So this is on this network, who am I going to allow to HTTPS into the FortiGate on this port, or who am I going to allow to SSH onto this IP or ping this IP. Security fabric connection, that's mostly for Forti switches, FortiAPs, Fortinet devices in general. Don't need to really worry too much about this unless you're connecting additional Fortinet devices. As we'll see here, you have the DHCP server, so this was what gave us the IP address, as we saw earlier. The very first address that is able and available was .110, which is what I had. And here we have the subnet or the net mask. And the gateway, which we also saw, was the same as the interface IP, which if we scroll up, is the guy. So, typically we'll be leaving that as is. And the DNS server, again, we're looking at DHCP. So FortiGate is going to be saying, hey, if you are connected to any of these ports and you need DHCP, I'm going to be sending you to my system DNS. So that's the DNS for the FortiGate. And you can see that right underneath interfaces right here. By default, it uses FortiGuard servers. Right now it's not reachable because we have no WAN connection. And it does it over a secure DNS over TLS or DOT. You can change that as needed. You could also change this to use Google DNS or Cloudflare DNS, maybe something, of course, that's more reliable. I've had instances where this sometimes, the FortiGuard servers, that is, don't do a great job. But we'll go back to the interface and we can specify DNS server. So I already configured a little bit of this beforehand, so it already popped up, which is nice. I just put Cloudflare and Google DNS. And the lease time, that's how long clients that get DHCP, how long, they have their IP address until, they ask again, like, hey, can I keep this address? And that's the gist. There's more stuff, but I'm not going to get into that. This is the gist you need to know. I will be changing this because that's probably one of the first things you're going to be doing is changing this to a network that's not likely to be used anywhere else, especially once you start getting like remote access clients or people from home networks. Most people's home networks, including mine, as you saw, are on a .1.0/24, or basically this subnet. So we're going to pick something unique. Let's do, I don't know, we'll do 222.1. So again, we're specifying what the gateway is. So this, we got to put .1 because this is the IP we're giving to this VLAN switch. And then we're also going to have to go down here, and I'll just copy and paste this out, honestly. .30, and we'll do .254. So I'm leaving the first 30 addresses, or I guess technically 29 addresses, but I'm leaving that for static IPs. So if you need to statically assign addresses, you can do it between .2 and .29. Everything onwards is DHCP, but if you know anything about DHCP, you can also go into advanced and create, these are DHCP options. That's different than what I want. IP address assignment rules. So this is where you can set DHCP reservations. So you would put the MAC address of a client, and then you would specify what IP address you always want to reserve it for, as it says. So that's one way. If you do need, let's say a printer or an access point to be using DHCP but kept with the same IP address. That's what we would use there. But anyways, we will not run under advanced just yet. So we have the new subnet. So we will go ahead and click OK here. We're going to click OK again, and we're going to lose access. So we're going to do ipconfig release, and we're going to do ipconfig renew. This will make sure that I get a new set addressing, hopefully from the FortiGate. Let's see, still dot. Oh, you know what? Yeah, I statically assigned that, as you had recalled. So let's go back to properties here, and we'll switch that. Let's go back. Let's do DHCP, and we'll do a DNS server automatically. Fetch that. Click close. All right, now if we renew, now we have the .222.30, and our gateway is to the FortiGate. So now we're going to switch our access methods to 222.1, and of course switch that to HTTPS. Type admin, type my password, and we will click later. Alrighty. So now we have a LAN and we have a address. Again, make sure this is not going to overlap with any networks. Even if they're remote sites, you don't want your LANs, in case you ever decide to connect these remote sites, then if they have the same subnets, you're going to have to do some natting rules in order for it to not conflict, which makes things messier than they need to be. So let's avoid that. Alright, now that we've discussed the LAN side of things, let's go ahead and configure our WAN. So you'll notice that the WAN port is configured. You'll also notice I took out LAN 2 and LAN 3, so you can remove the interfaces or add them onto the VLAN switch and whatnot. I'll actually put them back on for now, but in any case, we have the WAN connection, and I've plugged this into, let's say, my internet service provider's modem or their handoff equipment. Matter of fact, just to kind of give you a sense of what you might see, this is very simplified, and I'll tell you that many service providers give you very different blocks and addresses, so it can be kind of confusing because it's always different. But typically they'll always give you a block, which is basically the net mask or the subnet, and then they'll give you a IP of the modem or the network equipment that you're going to be pointing your FortiGate to. So that's where we're going to send our static route, and you'll see that coming up here shortly. But we will also look at the customer usable. So this is the block of addresses that our internet service provider has given us that we've paid for. And we have also got a Sienna router that we're going to be connecting to. So I often see Siennas with internet service provider equipment. Typically, you can also see them often when they need to provide copper handoff. So like fiber comes into the building and you need a copper handoff, or essentially that means Ethernet. Because this FortiGate does not support fiber. So either we're going to have our service provider provide us a copper handoff, or a way to plug into their equipment using Ethernet. Or we're going to have some kind of fiber to a copper converter. So they specify us to use port 3. So let's go ahead and configure this. So I'm going to pick the next IP that we can use. So I will switch this from DHCP to manual. Some service providers may give you an address, some do not. Some don't even give you a static block, and then you'll have to use DHCP and then maybe set up some kind of dynamic DNS, which is basically a DNS name that follows your ever-changing WAN address.
But in our case, it's static. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to configure this public IP under here. So we saw that it was a /29. So you can either put /29, or you could do what it does here and put 255.255.255.248. That would be a /29. We're going to call this AT&T because that's my service provider. And the administrative access is a very important topic for the WAN. So the LAN side, I mean, obviously we're going to need to access this FortiGate from the LAN. From the WAN, however, you may want to not use HTTPS. By default, it's disabled for good reason. If you do decide to enable this, make sure that you restrict it only to allowed IP addresses. We'll talk about that, later, but for now, I would never do this until you know how to restrict WAN access to certain IP addresses. So yeah, that's essentially all it is with this. So we're going to click OK. And now we have our WAN. And later I'll talk about SD-WAN in another video. But for now, we're going to keep this very simple and just say we have one WAN connection and we're not planning to ever use two ISPs. But I will say you likely will probably want to make a standard of using SD-WAN, which essentially means that your gateway is going to be configured under here. And, you might have 2-3 ISPs, and then it intelligently decides which one to use based off of performance. But for us, in our circumstance, I'm going to keep it very simple. And we're going to create a static route out to the internet. So what we're going to do is we are going to say anything that goes outbound to the internet. So when we say 0.0.0.0/0, if none of my existing routes match, then anything that I don't know about, send it to this gateway address. And our gateway address is going to be the gateway that we specified in our notepad, which was this AT&T router. So again, any route that I don't know how to take or any address I don't know where to go to, send it to AT&T. So we're going to specify the interface, which it already selected the WAN, which is fantastic. And the administrative distance comes into play more when you have multiple routes or different ways of taking the same path. Again, we're not going to dig too much into that, but just know that the lower this number, the more trustworthy that route is going to be. So if I say 1, then that is going to be a very trustworthy route. And it goes all the way to 255, I believe. It doesn't say, but it should be 255. So that's the least trustworthy. So, typically people leave it as the default unless they need to prioritize that route. And I'm going to just call this out to internet. Fantastic. And this priority is also another metric that we can use in the case that the administrative distance is the same for both sides. But we're not going to get into that too much either. We're just trying to get out to the internet, get it configured and set up. So now we have a static route. Can I get out to the internet? There is a CLI console that once you start working with FortiGates, you're going to love it, especially for debugging and any troubleshooting purposes. We can test the outbound connectivity of the FortiGate itself. Let's see and check to see if ping works. So now it works. So that was very good. I did re-enable my main Ethernet. I'm going to disable that real quick so that we can test on my machine. And yeah, forgot how large that was. And we'll do a ping to 1.1.1. And it works. Fantastic. One thing to quickly check too is the firewall policy. It always wants us to use the new layout. I won't do that for now. So by default, it's going to give you a LAN to AT&T or sorry, WAN, LAN to WAN connection. So with firewall policies, this is where the real meat and potatoes of a firewall come into play. So by default, it gives you a way out to the internet. And you can already see on the bytes section that there's already some traffic passing. So what this essentially is saying is that anyone coming from the LAN, which is my PC, and going out of the interface, we're going to allow anyone from the LAN, all addresses, doesn't matter what, and then we're going to allow them to any address outside towards the WAN. And we're going to always allow this all day, every day, and allow the service all day, every day. And services can be restricted based off of ports and protocols. You can even add your own service if you have like SSH or something running on a different port. And we have an action, accept or deny. You probably want to get out to the WAN port, or like to Google. This NAT is important. So when we're going from LAN to WAN, we need to basically masquerade or change this addressing here. We need to change this when it gets out to the internet to look like this. So once it looks like this, it's basically able to be routed, right? So that's essentially what NAT does under the hood. So it's just a quick enable or don't enable, and we use the outgoing interface address, and that outgoing interface is the WAN, what we just looked at, right? This address right here, that's what we're going to be using when we run through this particular policy. Source port I'll be really quick on, but basically just keep the default. Preserve port is going to keep the same port, and if it isn't available, it's going to use the next one. Fixed port forces the port, but if that port's not available, then that's when services break. And if you disable this option, well, then it's just going to choose the next one up, which might cause some issues with servers and PBX stuff that needs that source port to stay. Security profiles we'll go into later. The general rule for security profiles is that if you're going to any untrusted network, you probably want to have this enabled. And these are honestly their own topic. You can decide to use the default, but do note that if you do use this stuff, it's not going to be of any use until you put SSL inspection. So you'll notice that when I turned it on, it doesn't perform any inspection. So these are essentially worthless if it can't see anything. So certificate inspection is like the next level up. And that just basically looks at the certificates of the sites that you're going to, right? So Google or what have you, and you can create your own inspection profiles and your own rules in here and say, do I want to allow, websites that do not have a certificate, that kind of situation. The next step is more drastic and will definitely need some configuration without, impacting your users. Because when you use deep inspection, you're basically having the FortiGate act as a middle in the man, or man in the middle, man in the middle, and it's going to take the packet, it's going to unencrypt the packet, it's going to look inside the packet, and then it's going to re-encrypt it and send it back out to the website. Knowing that, if your device doesn't trust the FortiGate to decrypt your packets, then that's going to become a big headache. So that's why when you use this, you're typically going to be deploying certificates so that your end users or their devices can trust the FortiGate when it decrypts the packets and whatnot. That's where these security profiles really come into play. That's where you can get some really gains, but again, deep inspection also comes with its own concerns because you're decrypting it, and it becomes a matter of one, privacy, but also if a threat actor ever gets access to this FortiGate, or if you have an insider threat, some employee that has access to the FortiGate and they can just see whatever, you have to give or take on your risk profile essentially. And then lastly, you can log security events or all sessions. So security events means any bad stuff, malicious items, stuff that you've flagged under, the IPS, antivirus, all this stuff, right? If anything gets flagged, it's going to be logged. Now, if you want to log all sessions, then you can see basically all the Fortinet traffic, right? So let me go ahead and click OK here. And by default, you always need to put a name, so I'm just going to call this LAN to WAN. We're going to click OK. Great. And now that it's checking in, now it's knowing that it needs to upgrade to the latest firmware. So this is where you can upgrade your firmware from the portal itself or from the FortiGate without having to go to FortiCloud and downloading an image and all that stuff. But yeah, if we go to Fortinet traffic, we don't see any just yet. Quick addendum. So I realized what the issue was, and that was because I was connected to my VPN. So because the traffic was tunneling, and also because, I also have my regular adapter connected as well. That's why I couldn't see any traffic. So once I got basically back on only this network, then we could start seeing traffic pass under the Ford logs. So, great view to see, the source IP where you can filter saying, hey, here's the source IP. And you can also look for any denied entries such as these. These were test items I did. So, yep. And while we're talking about the LAN to WAN, let's also quickly go over addresses, because you'll very likely want to specify source and destination addressing. So on a WAN policy, you're obviously going to want to go out to any network. With the source, you may want to be more specific, because that's best practice. What if there's some kind of address behind this LAN that you don't want to essentially go out to the internet? Maybe it's some particular device. So we can either click on source and select add here or create, and then we can create an address. And that's what makes FortiGate really nice on the GUI, is you can quickly make anything very quickly on the spot without having to move from your configuration page. But if you did want to specify this by itself, you would go to addresses and create new here. And so let's call this lab LAN. Yeah, let's just call it lab LAN. And I've already forgotten what the addressing was. Let me check out my IP config here. Yeah, so it's 222. So we will go ahead and paste that in with a /24. And yeah, static route configuration, very useful if you have destinations that you're planning on routing to. So take, for example, if there's data center or some kind of host of services that you need to route to, you can specify all of those different objects and toggle the static route. And then once you group them together, matter of fact, let's just show it real quick too. Let's say site 1, right? And then we'll just give it a 9.1.1.1 static route. Oh, and let's do a /32. If you do see a /32, that just means this IP only. And now if we go to static routes, which should be under network and static routes, we can use a named address and say site 1. So no longer do we need to specify 9.1.1.1/32 and then selecting our WAN interface, we just simply just say use site 1. It gives it a little bit more descriptive name, right? And of course, we'll give the gateway address, which again is the ISP. Okay, this guy. So that's how we get out to 9.1.1. Or again, for now, that's also this. A lot of times you're going to be using this for VPN tunnels. That's when I use them, but we're not getting there yet, just yet. Quick note about system events. This will tell you everything that goes on basically with this device. So this device, you will see every single thing that happens. So this system event is going to be basically your event log. If you live in Windows world, this is going to be your event log to look at. Not only just general system events, but VPN, router. You have a bunch of different events, and they're all very useful. Yeah, so that's how you kind of get this running and going. Again, obviously, there's a lot more to go through, and I will obviously show that in due time. But the main gist of this is that we're going to be setting up our interface, local interface. So that is this. You set up your WAN connection. You set up your static route to go out to the ISP's gateway. And then you set up your firewall policy if not already configured. Again, this should be configured automatically unless you're using some kind of custom FortiGate image. So yeah, that's the gist here. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and have a good one.